Welcome to The Deep End by On Deck, a podcast where visionary builders, creators, and experts discuss world-changing ideas. I'm your host, Marshall Kozloff. Let's dive in.
I think in a crypto native world, or in a world where you have digital scarcity tied to value, you can basically turn these likes, follows, share subscribers and you can convert them into cash. And so we're already actually seeing that with this blockchain game called Axie Infinity, where basically you can earn this in-game asset, this in-game currency. And with this currency, it's SLP. And there's also this governance token as well that you can earn. But you can basically take, and people in the Philippines are using this as a full-time job. They're taking these in-game assets that they're earning and then converting it to their local currency. And by that, they're able to pay for their groceries, pay for their rent, and things of that nature.
At The Deep End, we're creating a space where we skip the surface level and go in depth into ideas that matter. I'll be your guide as we explore possible futures of commerce, higher education, art, governance, longevity, and more. Joining me this week in The Deep End is Patrick Rivera. Patrick is a product engineer at Mirror, a no-code platform for Web3 tools. He also writes prolifically about the creator economy and developments in crypto. From the outside, it often seems that crypto is just continuing cycles of speculative bubbles. But insiders like Patrick know that each cycle brings the capital needed to invest in critical infrastructure. That infrastructure then fuels further activity, more mainstream adoption, and increasingly practical applications. On the show today, Patrick walks us through the fundamentals of crypto and paints a picture of the crypto landscape today. We first discussed the history of the internet and some of its limitations in its current form before diving into hot JPEG summer, the exciting, fast-moving world that Patrick is helping to build today. We also discuss how a crypto-native creator economy could evolve into a curator economy where curators behave almost like angel investors online. Patrick is also clear-eyed about some of the current limitations of crypto and discusses how to meet the industry's challenges. We conclude our hour with Patrick by looking towards the future, predicting how fields like commerce, governance, and social networks may experience radical transformations sooner than we think. Before we get started, we have our next live recording scheduled for September 28th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time with Cooper Turley. Cooper is an advisor to Audius and is an expert in all things DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, which we discussed with Patrick in today's episode. Cooper will be one of our first guests on our upcoming second season. We're excited to chat with him and welcome live questions from the audience. To register for the event, please visit luma/Cooper. That's lu.ma/Cooper. The Deep End is produced by On Deck, where top talent goes to accelerate their ideas and careers. We hope that those who listen to the ideas on the show are inspired to build. To learn more about On Deck's programs, visit beyonddeck.com. For show notes and additional resources related to The Deep End, check out ideas.beyonddeck.com. All right, let's dive in. Patrick Rivera, welcome to The Deep End.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Patrick, this started as an episode that was going to focus on NFTs, non-fungible tokens specifically, but we came across this really amazing presentation you gave called Crypto Fundamentals and NFTs. And it's basically a encapsulation of a space that a lot of people are interested in learning more about. And you do a really great job of actually making clear that NFTs, while very cool and very interesting and deeply impactful, are part of a broader intellectual framework, which we should actually bring to any of these topics. So I would love to take the chance to dive into all of that with you. But let's just start with you. I'm really interested in your background and how that led you to Mirror, the work that you do there, and then your deep interest in crypto-focused things.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually studied finance in undergrad and thought I wanted to do management consulting. That was a really cool thing. But then after doing a few internships, realized, that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. I wanted to get closer to actually building the product. And so I was interning in San Francisco, saw what software development teams were doing, and noticed that, it's not just sitting in a basement coding all day, looking at your screen. It's depending on the size of the company and how much of a focus they have on software. The engineering team, I noticed, they're being creative. They're working with designers. They're working with PMs, scoping out projects, features, thinking about the strategy. And so I decided to learn to code there. And in my senior year, spent learning to code, and then ended up moving to San Francisco. Took a one-way flight, and had a few friends that were starting a startup, and they were just looking for someone to help out with some of the more like menial engineering tasks. And I was like, all right, why not? I haven't done an internship yet, help them out. And then got really lucky and went to a YC career fair, or Y Combinator career fair, and talked to the founder of Instacart and just talked about how much I love the product, was using it all the time. And we were just jamming for like 10 minutes on different feature ideas. And then he asked me if I wanted to interview. I said, of course. And then from there, basically ended up working there for the next year on the growth team as an engineer. And that was a ton of fun. First professional engineering experience. And just like 6 months before that, I didn't even know how to code. So that was pretty wild experience going through that. And then, but after about a year, the projects there, they started kind of looking the same, and they'd already hit their growth spurt. Well, it was pre-COVID actually. So they still had a lot more growth to go. But at that point, it was like, I was kind of looking for other opportunities as well. And then ended up getting in touch with a crypto startup called Dharma. And they reached out to me. They were looking to start a growth team. And they saw that I'd worked on a growth team at Instacart. And I didn't necessarily know too much about crypto actually. And at that point, I was more so hearing about it from different podcasts and seeing really smart people like Chris Dixon end up spending most of their time on crypto as opposed to other areas. And so that really made me pay attention. I was like, I don't know if this specific company is going to go off and be this massive success, but I know the people there are really impressive and I enjoy talking to them. And worst case, I just learn a lot and learn about this new industry. And so worked there for a few months. And then that was like in the middle of COVID, and learned a lot in terms of just crypto, how it works from the engineering side. And it was like DeFi summer where a lot of tokens were doing these token rewards programs where instead of like a cash referral program like you would have in traditional companies, they basically gave them equity in the form of these crypto tokens to their users that were using their products. And so that was a pretty crazy summer. But at that point, it was like middle of COVID. I was really thinking about what I wanted to do with my career, and I became really interested in creator economy. And so at that point, ended up deciding I wanted to devote like all my time thinking about creator economy, working on that, and left to pursue different startup ideas. And a few months later, basically the mashup between crypto and creator economy appeared with Mirror. And I actually had worked with the CTO Graham at Dharma, and he was my manager. And so we had chatted and had seen what they were working on, different experiments, and just thought that was a great fit. And so been at Mirror the past about 6 or 7 months, and haven't looked back since then.
And what is Mirror?
Yeah, so Mirror, we like to view it as like a no-code platform for Web3 tools. And so a few of the different tools we have are crowdfunding, and we also have things for NFT auctions, NFT edition sales, revenue splits. We also have a tokenized onboarding game to onboard new members to our platform.
What I love about the story you just gave about getting into tech, coding, all those things, I normally ignore that in an interview, is that it was so specific to a pre-COVID moment. Fly out to San Francisco, go to an in-person career fair. So something I'm wondering is, for everyone who's listening to this episode and they're either a creator, they're young like you were back in school, trying to find an alternative to management consulting or finance, what does getting into the crypto space look like now? Is it you moved to Brooklyn? Where does this story go when you retell it from a forward-looking perspective?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. And something I think a lot about, because I do have friends that are still in school or just graduating. And the most interesting thing post-COVID is that where people hang out specifically in crypto is basically online. Of course, it's Twitter, it's Discord servers, it's Telegram chats. And so, probably every few weeks, I'm talking to someone and they're asking that exact question. And the first thing I say is, one, go to Twitter, find a curated list. Feel free to go to who I follow. I try to keep it fairly curated, and it is people that I enjoy learning from, reading what they're talking about. So that's one, and that'll give you a high volume of like high quality information that you can follow and parse through. And then inevitably you'll see like different projects being mentioned. And the cool thing about crypto is that, you don't need to there's no degree. There is no like bachelor's in crypto, master's degree in crypto. And so all of it is really through active contributing. And so with many of these different projects, and they have Discord servers, you join, you volunteer, you hang out in the chat, you meet people in the voice calls, you try and work on a project together, you offer to lead a project once you feel more comfortable. And so I think that it really rewards people that are willing to get get their hands dirty, go into the Discord servers, talk to people, write about things online, write blog posts. And yeah, I think that's really the best way to do it, as opposed to, I think now in terms of moving somewhere specifically, I think work and lifestyle are decoupled now. And so you can technically live where you want to live and then you work online. And yeah, Mirror has been fully distributed from day one, and we don't plan on having an in-person office anytime soon. And so, yeah, I think that's one of the biggest opportunities. And one of the things I enjoy most about crypto is that there's people from all over the world and they're just online. I don't know. There's like one company called Rari Capital where they have, I think their leadership team is under 21 years old. They have an engineer who's 15 years old, and they're one of the top DeFi protocols. And it's just incredible to see stuff like that.
Something obvious comes to mind, which is you're a younger person, you're looking at this space and you're thinking, okay, cool, I'm going to follow up on projects. How does someone discern what's legitimate or not? But as you were saying it, I realize your answer is probably going to be something along the lines of that's where reputation matters. So that's why you're talking about curated lists and this person respects. It's not, given the fact that all this is performed publicly to a certain degree, it's not as if there's just this imperceptible list, but I'm curious about how you think about that.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's piggybacking off the signal that other people that are respected in the industry that they give out. And so, one of the things when I was trying to break into tech in Silicon Valley was a lot of people recommended looking at top VCs, looking at their portfolio, seeing who they invested in, seeing how much, what round, and then from there using that as kind of like a step one, because that's VC's job, is to curate a portfolio and curate one that they think is going to be a high return to their LPs. And so there's some nuances. That's a good first step, first filtering mechanism. But I think second step is, okay, then now thankfully with Twitter, you can go and see, okay, what is the executive team talking about, the founding team, what are they tweeting about, how do they think about things? Then also go into the Discord server. And yeah, one interesting aspect is also that not only is the code open source in crypto and also the data open source, but also a lot of the thinking, the knowledge, the information is open source as well. And so you can do a ton of due diligence. And it's very fascinating where recently many of these projects, they're raising rounds of traditional venture capital. And in the past, you basically go into Sand Hill Road, go into this nice office, you're really nervous, go in there. And then as an entrepreneur, you'd be pitching this VC firm and you're basically on their home court. Whereas now a lot of these VC firms are going to these Discord servers and then they're having this voice call, this voice chat with the community, hundreds of people in the community, grilling them on questions, ask them, why should we give you a discount to participate in this round? How are you going to contribute versus other VCs or versus other people within the community? And so now the roles are reversed and you can actually see, okay, what are the terms that we're raising at? Who are the VCs? How are they thinking about it? How are we thinking about raising this capital? And so I think that from that perspective, you're able to, not only do you use all this just wealth of public information as a way to decide where to work, but then also over time to find new opportunities and see what's the leading edge.
So let's actually get into the leading edge part of this conversation, because what I love about the actual presentation you put together that we will link out in the show notes is you just open with a question, which is NFTs, which are probably the hippest, most lucrative, at least for right now, part of this crypto conversation. Are they just another fad or are they the next big thing? And what you then do is you say, but wait, we got to take a step back and look at the broader infrastructure of the internet. So let's actually start there. You outline Web 1.0 through 3.0. Everyone's always talking about Web 3.0 today. So let's just go through these different eras, starting with Web 3.0, the definition, some specific examples that people are going to have resonated with. It was very nostalgic looking through your articulation of them. But let's start with 1.0, 2.0, then we'll get to 3.0.
Yeah. So recently, someone named Ashita wrote an article that I think frames it very, very well. And so Web 1.0, you can think about it as read only. And so some of the properties of Web 1.0 is, we could say a time period from early 90s to say early 2000s. And so there was static websites. Basically, there's online directories, there's portals, there's instant messenger through AIM. And then there's also physical goods marketplaces. And so that's like eBay. You have a website and then you're transferring physical goods from point A to point B between consumers. And so that's what it's characterized by. And then also there's limited hardware and limited bandwidth in terms of, okay, you have dial-up connection, you don't have broadband yet. And so that's also reminiscent of right now. I'd view crypto and specifically the Ethereum network as the pre-broadband era because it's not as scalable, it's very expensive. And so it's very reminiscent of that. And so that's Web 1. And then Web 2 is characterized by, as she just says, it's read and write. And I really like that framing as well, where now you evolve from, okay, you have these static websites, and then it moves to more interactive, where you have comments. It's really characterized by the social networks. Those are the first ones to really take off, say Facebook, Twitters of the world, et cetera. And so that's, you're building a social graph for the first time. You're able to scale these applications and have millions of requests per second. You're able to have these very complex relationships with different people. And it's really about sharing information. And then also with mobile, and that's a proliferation of apps. And then also with GPS, being able to kind of combine physical world, digital world through things like Uber, Airbnb, et cetera. And then also things around cloud, SaaS, et cetera, in terms of evolving how enterprises use software as well. And so we could say that's around like early 2000s to probably this current period or even last couple of years. And so now with Web3, I think a few of the different areas that are...
Quick question, and I'm actually wondering how you think about this. I'm sure you've seen people putting around the what happened in 1971, just idea of like a hashtag, a focus area. In your presentation, you say that Web 2.0 really goes to 2018. What happened in 2018 that transitions us to 3.0 as people think about the space?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say it's not that was fairly arbitrary, but I think more so around this time period is that people are becoming kind of disenchanted with the current model of the web and these large social networks. It could have started when the election, when the election issues with Facebook in terms of, were foreign actors able to meddle with with our domestic policy by hacking into their systems. Also things around, another hot topic recently is around like the App Store fees with iOS, and then be able to charge 30% fees and unilaterally dictate terms of payments and monetization and things of that nature. And so I think recently a lot of the things around, there are these massive corporations. Unlike previous eras, it seems like they're very sophisticated. They're reinvesting in the future. They're willing to invest in projects that may not yield a positive net return anytime in the near future. And they're just very forward thinking, and they've seen what happened in the past. And so I think now in the last few years, people are worried about what does the world look like 10 years from now without any sort of solution to these problems, and looking for new solutions. I think that's one of the reasons why a lot of people are very excited about Web3.
This is actually helpful. One more question before we get to Web3. Looking at both the web and then crypto, basically let's say it's the world of 2018, give or take a few years to your point. What would your critique be of that late stage Web 2.0 era, both at a consumer level, but also a creator and a platform level?
Yeah. And so I like to think about it as, personally, I don't spend too much time consuming like traditional media sources, such as, say, I don't want to necessarily call people out, but traditional media sources. And so I would say that instead I spend my time on platforms where I'm consuming content from like individual creators, whether it's Mr. Beast, whether it's podcasts, whether it's on Twitter, whether it's Substack, whether it's for entertainment on TikTok. That's how I'm spending most of my time. And the people that are creating that content, think about it as a marketplace. The supply side is the content creation, and the demand side are all the people that are consuming that content for hours a day. But at the end of the day, the economics of that relationship, of that marketplace, are not necessarily in favor of the supply side or even the demand side, people that are curating and sharing with their friends. And so, of course, it's mostly an ad-based business model, and that tends to favor the intermediaries because they can aggregate the data. They use that to run proprietary algorithms, help you stay more engaged, and then serve ads to monetize that attention. And so that works for many reasons. I think one of the big benefits is that it allows content to be free. And that's very important in terms of having access to information, having access to education, entertainment opportunities, et cetera. But then one of the big downsides is that now it's really hard to professionalize as a creator, as someone that's creating this content that's educational, that's entertaining. And I view a lot of my learnings, whether specifically even for like learning how to code, through these creators on YouTube, for people that on podcasts, people that were creating ebooks online for just a few dollars. And so I view that as a very important part of the future of education, entertainment, et cetera. And so I think with Web3, basically I view it, one of the main things is that it's a revolution in business models as well. It's not just a technical innovation. It's also in providing new business models that are more native to the internet, that are more native to digital media, digital content. And it allows people to monetize that content in a way that they control, as opposed to kind of being intermediated by some of these larger platforms.
Something I'm really obsessed with is, and we discussed this in a previous episode, but where are there examples on the web of people importing pre-web models into a web way that don't make any sense? Because you're making this reference to it's like native to the web. So a good example I always give is when the New York Times first went online in the 1990s, they just took the literal paper, made it digital, and it just kind of sits there. And it's only when they start leaning into, well, should it look like this? Should there be this, all these different parts, that it becomes a much more successful business. So if you're thinking about the web space that everyone's basically playing in, or are there any good examples of Web 1.0 or even Web 2.0 arrangements, expectations, standards that haven't been imported into the place we are? Because my personal example is we, spoke with Joe from Stir, and something they do that I love. And the second I heard this, it blew my mind. It's the splits on YouTube ad revenue. Because typically if you're watching a TV show like Fox, MSNBC, CNN, if you appear on a show, you're just doing it for free. Like you're not getting any actual promotion or anything basically like that, because you're just getting the benefit of doing it. But what's so cool about this Web 3.0 tool is, hey, like you helped me come on this video, you brought your audience, promoted it, we could split that and make that really easy to do. So are there any examples of similar features in the spaces you cover?
Yeah. I love the New York Times example. And I think that's a really great one. And I think another really stark example is, let's say, the music industry and streaming. I think the core issue is that, and one of my favorite people to read about this topic is Ben Thompson from Tech Read, around, just a pre-internet distribution was the most important resource, because before the internet, in order to transport information, goods, et cetera, if you can't do it online, you need to do it offline. And so you need shipping containers, trucks, you needed bandwidth for, if you're a cable company or a radio company as well. And so pre-internet distribution was very important. And that's why we needed intermediaries to be able to kind of bundle that information and then distribute it in a cost-effective way so that consumers could pay for it and be able to pay for it with discretionary income. And so now, though, with the internet, I think that distribution is free for the most part. The marginal cost of, if I post a blog post on Mirror, Medium, Substack, sharing it to one person versus 1,000 people versus 1 million people is basically negligible. And so I think that just the idea of, okay, now we have these intermediaries still, like for example, with streaming, okay, it's important still because there's just so much information. And so the idea of like curation is very important, and allowing people to kind of saying, okay, this artist was signed by this label, that's very important. But I also feel like creators and kind of the supply side, like the online marketplace, I feel like, I think that the importance of distribution and kind of like the rent-seeking nature of it, I think that, the native version of it is kind of allowing creators to be able to distribute the content themselves directly to consumers, give them the tools, and give consumers the tools to curate themselves, and allow it to be a more direct relationship between the supply side, the creators, and also the demand side, the consumers and curators. And there's still, I think, a role for distribution in terms of like management, financing, marketing. But I think that, just the proliferation of other tools will make it so that, it kind of like reorganizes that market structure a bit.
I love that you put it that way, because too many people, especially during early days, I think underestimated how important distribution is. So look at a lot of the creator economy discourse, like, why would you go to the New York Times? Why would you do this and that when you could just do a newsletter? And I think what a lot of people forgot, and this is why you see things like Hot Pod, which was Nick Quah's really good podcasting newsletter, get acquired by Vulture, New York Magazine, Vox Media, is that actually distribution is still important. Just to your point, the balance and the mathematics are different. And pre-internet, distribution was basically everything. Obviously, you're going to go to the book publisher with the most, with the biggest ability to push the most books, all those different parts. So, okay, so now we are in Web 3.0, and the place where I want to go is, I love your articulation of what Web 3 is about: solving hard problems, using tech, and then fixing what's wrong. I would just love you to hear you go through that example, and then we'll get into the crypto application of that.
Yeah. And so given the context of Web 2 and what's been going on, I think the most interesting aspects of Web 3 are solving hard problems in the world of atoms. And so basically in the physical world, there's things around AI, of course, specifically like AI as a service. In the past, like in Web 2, AI has been mostly stored inside, there's been machine learning algorithms run in data centers and servers controlled by just a few large internet platforms. Whereas in the future with things like GPT-3, AI will just be a service that can be embedded in all sorts of applications. And then also around like democratizing like financial freedom. And so living in a developing country or developed country is kind of difficult to imagine someone without access to credit or an online bank, or the ability to send money internationally, or the ability to get paid like on a regular basis, and kind of, just even like the simple things that we take for granted. And so I think there's a few areas that I'm really interested in, and also in the world of like sensors and kind of embedding kind of the mix of hardware and software in the real world, whether it's on our bodies through things like levels, whether it's like on machines and automatically allowing things like your bed or your home to be optimized to a certain temperature so that you can feel better and optimize costs, things like that. And so, those are a few things that, and of course, space is another massive one as well. And being able to kind of reduce the cost of producing items and making it cheaper for things, and also climate change, green energy. And so I think these are a lot of the harder problems, and we've solved a lot of the low-hanging fruit around communication, information. There's still a lot to do there, but now it's kind of going into these more deeper tech areas as well.
And a good example that leads us into the more crypto-focused part of the discussion is the fact that crypto specifically is about using tech to help the disadvantaged, then fixing what's wrong with the internet today. But to go back to something you said earlier, we are still in the pre-broadband era of crypto, which means there's a lot of opportunity ahead of us, but there are a lot of short-term hurdles. I'm curious, can you really describe for us what pre-broadband crypto looks like at an infrastructure level too?
Definitely. So I view the three main problems today with crypto. One is around the UX experience. And so that's kind of a function of kind of the architecture of these crypto networks. It's that now, instead of storing your password in a database that some company controls, now it's your assets are controlled by a private key that you're basically responsible for custodying. And there's a few crypto wallets out there, but they're notoriously difficult just because it's such a new technology. And so not only is it hard just to like get on board, it's not as easy as like email password. Instead, it's like, okay, you have this red warning sign that says, if you lose this private key, then you lose access to all your funds. Mm-hmm. That'd be pretty scary if you lost your password. Like we're all used to a world of reset password. And if you
send a new card.
Exactly. You lose your password to Bank of America and you lose your entire life savings. Like that's very scary. And so that's one, around the UX and onboarding. Two is around it's basically the transaction fees. And then specifically on Ethereum network, it's known as gas fees. And so the idea here is that I like to think about these crypto networks is that it's just like this computer, it's this database that is run by many different computers. And basically instead of one company or one group of people controlling it, it's this distributed network. And so in order to incentivize people to spin up computers, to run them, and to basically pay for the electricity fees to be able to secure the network and to confirm transactions, you basically have to incentivize them economically. And so what you do is by paying these transaction fees. And here it's like an auction model where there's only a limited amount of space per 15 seconds for submitting transactions to the Ethereum network. And so if there's just fundamental economics, if there's a fixed supply and there's more demand, then the prices are going to increase. And so the gas fees right now, they're quite ridiculous. Like just to send, if I was going to send ETH to you the other day, it was like $50 just to send it. And so, that's definitely something that yeah, if we're going to do things, that's just like a simple transfer. But if we want to do things like consumer applications, if we want to do like high throughput of music streaming, video streaming, et cetera, there's going to need to be a lot of like technical innovation in terms of making that very cheap and making that more accessible to people. And so that's second. And then third, I would say is around just a lack of talent. And it's just so early in the space. And some of what impressed me most about crypto at first is just the multidisciplinary nature of the people in it. So there's computer science PhDs, there's economics PhDs, there's more like hackers, there's people that are just very interested in economics, there's people that are very good at community building. And so there's just still a scarcity of talent and people that we need in this space, building projects. Like every day, there's just so many new ideas or problems that are surfaced that we need people to solve. And so that's really right now what I view as kind of the early areas to focus on. One is around the onboarding experience, two is gas fees, and then three is around getting more talented people building some projects in crypto.
I would love, before I go to a couple other areas, to have you talk about the idea of being early in crypto, because I personally have made this mistake, right? I'm a dude who but like really starts thinking more about something like Bitcoin in 2018. And my take is like, man, I wish I could go back in time to 2013. I'd be so rich, like this, and that. And then I just kind of like put it aside. But that was 2018, right? And a bunch of things happened since then. And now everyone's talking about NFTs. It always feels like in this space, despite the fact that you're very correct that it's early, it always feels like it's too late. But it's obviously not. So can you just speak to how people should think about that? Because I perpetually find that's my biggest problem with anything crypto related. It feels like it's too late, but ask people what an NFT was 6 months ago, and there was still a lot of like actual value at a literal speculative level, but also at a pure intellectual work in the skill level to actually still be claimed. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Definitely. So one of the key properties or features of crypto is the composability. And so the idea is that, so this code is open source. When you deploy it to a blockchain, anybody can see what exactly the logic is of that code. Not only can they see it and read it, but depending on the logic, many of them, anybody can actually use that contract and they can use it themselves. And not only like as a user and like to actually transfer funds or take out a loan, but also developers can build on top of that. And instead of having, say, an API where it's controlled by a corporation and you don't know if they're going to rate limit you, they're going to cut off access, they're going to change they're going to change how this endpoint works. Instead, these are just open source code. You can verify it yourself. And there's definitely some nuances there, but at a high level, that's how it works. And so one of the key properties that comes out of that is composability. And so I think that every wave in crypto is basically just adding one more layer of composability or one more Lego block is how a lot of people like to describe it. And so I think the waves that we've seen so far, so first it started with cryptocurrency. And so that was really shown by Bitcoin. And so it's okay, you have this primitive, that's like the first Lego block is this cryptocurrency. It's this digitally native currency. It's decentralized. There's no one party that makes the rules. It's open source, et cetera, et cetera. And then the next big wave, I think, was DeFi. And so that's basically composing cryptocurrency with like financial logic and that stuff around like lending, that things like stable coins. That's like decentralized exchanges. There's derivatives products like options, et cetera. And so that's like the next one. That's composing like the first Lego block, which is like this decentralized currency plus smart contracts doing like financial applications. And then the next iteration of that is NFTs. And so that's basically taking a combination of, the underlying cryptocurrency, taking some of the innovations with DeFi, and then layering in culture and people that are creating like culturally relevant art, and then wrapping it in this financial primitive and known as an ERC20 token or an ERC721, which is that's what an NFT is. That's like the technical name for it. And so wrapping it in like the previous primitives that were used. And so I think that the next wave, so the way I like to think about it is, so you have these primitives and just being on the lookout for what are these primitives and then how do you combine them? And then seeing, and then thinking about, what's like the next logical step? And so I think the next big area right now that I'm thinking a lot about, and at Mirror, we're trying to build for are DAOs. And so DAOs, the way I like to think about them, they're kind of a combination of this like cooperatives, but then also you can think of them like the native corporate structure for blockchains. Like pre-blockchains, you have, or even today, the dominant corporate structure, LLCs, they're joint stock corporations. You have this legal contract that enforces the rules. But on blockchains, you have what's called a DAO, where now the rules are enforced.
And what does DAO stand for again?
Yep. So DAO is DAO, and it's a decentralized autonomous organization. And so people debate like how decentralized they are, how autonomous they are, how much of an organization they are. But that's kind of like the name that has stuck so far. And so in many cases, these DAOs are just group chats that now have money that lives on a blockchain, and it's controlled by this like shared wallet that different people in the DAO have control over. And so you think about it as, it's basically like, say a subreddit had a bank account that was online, and that there wasn't one person that could just take funds out of the bank account, that people had to vote to decide how to use the funds. And then you were able to use those funds with different other applications like these DeFi apps, or to buy NFTs, or to fund people within the community. And so I think that's the next kind of big thing that I'm looking for, because it's a combination of the first primitive, the cryptocurrencies, second primitive, like the smart contracts for financial applications, the third primitive of NFTs. You bundle those together and you get these digitally native organizations.
So the most obvious question to ask is, aside from the vibiness, the financial speculation, Twitter likes, let's put those things to the side, looking at DAOs, looking at NFTs, like what do you think so far what's useful? And obviously there's a value judgment there, but what is important at a deeper level around these two applications?
Yeah, that's a really good, like, fundamental question. And with DAOs, there are many different types that we can, broadly speaking, we can look at two different types. So one is these protocol DAOs. And so these come from these DeFi protocols. For example, let's take Uniswap as one. And so Uniswap is like the decentralized version of Coinbase. You can think about it like that. And so the difference is, so with Uniswap, you have the logic for, or basically what it is, it's a decentralized exchange. And so there's people that want to sell tokens, and there's other people that want to buy tokens. And so in the past, you would have market makers, and there's like this pretty opaque process of who was allowed to be a market maker, and what the rules were for allowing them to remain like plugged into the ecosystem. Whereas now with Uniswap, anybody can become a market maker. Anybody can basically say, hey, I have these two tokens. I want people to trade against them. I'm just going to deposit them into this pool. And then now when anybody can buy or sell them, and buy or sell those tokens, and I get a fee for those. And all of that is run through smart contracts, open source code. And so the benefit here and so the Uniswap started off as this team that was run by just like 5-10 people. They grew. They had, I think their daily volume reached as high as like 10 billion, or not daily volume, but I believe it was like monthly, something like that. And reached around like 10 billion. And at that point, they're like, okay, we are significantly large and important in the ecosystem that we think it's important for us to decentralize the decision making. Like we want Uniswap, the protocol, these contracts, these open source contracts, to be a public good that is governed by the token holders of our Uni token. And so the benefit of that is that now, the owners of the product, or the protocol in this case, are able to decide, okay, how is the protocol upgraded? How do we spend certain funds in the treasury? When should the fee be increased or decreased? Should it be removed? Whichever one of those they end up deciding. And so I think that the key features that now the backend, it's basically this open source code is the backend for the Uniswap protocol. Many other apps are using it. Now the backend is controlled by this decentralized distributed group of token holders. And frankly, in practice, it doesn't necessarily work as it seems very idealistic. In practice, there's a lot around like, what are the best governance models? Is it one person, one vote, or one token, one vote? Is it you elect a committee and you delegate to them? Is it you have people that are core contributors are only allowed to? And so there's still many other models to think through and to experiment with. But at a high level, I think the main benefit is that now the community, people in the community, it's very transparent, and they have a bit more of an ownership stake and an ownership say in how exactly these backends, these protocols are governed and upgraded and evolved over time.
That's a good example of a protocol that progressively centralizes into a DAO. Could you speak about other kinds of DAOs? Like, for example, what would it look like in the creator space? Or are there examples of people actively doing this right now that we can look to?
Yeah, definitely. So I recently joined one called Fingerprints DAO. I think they're very interesting as well, where they started off as NFT collectors, and there's a group of them, and they wanted to collect on-chain generative art. And so basically what that means in plain English is basically art that is just code that's on the blockchain. And then whenever somebody wants to mint it or purchase it, they basically they the contract takes in like a random input or a seed, and it generates this art. And from there, and a lot of people are very excited about it, because one of the issues with like storing JPEGs on the blockchain is that in reality, like these JPEGs or these NFTs are not stored on the blockchain. They're stored in an AWS server. They're stored in some other server. And so there's a lot of things that could go wrong there in terms of just the file being corrupted or the file being lost or censorship, et cetera. And so for a lot of like high value digital art and high value like digital assets, people want a more just like robust solution. And so people are very excited about this on-chain generative art, because everything is encapsulated within the contract, on-chain, independently verifiable. And so this group wanted to collect this type of art, and they basically banded together. And they're like, hey, we want to have one of the best collections for this art, but we don't want to put up the capital ourselves. We want to pool it together. And so then they ended up pooling capital together with a group of them, and they raised like a few $1 million. And they went out and started collecting NFTs. And then they said, hey, we have a decent amount of capital. We're going to offer membership for, it was like $40,000 to join this group. And it's definitely like a high barrier to entry, but they wanted to make sure that this was like a certain group of people that have been in this space, are very interested, and they're very committed and invested. And they basically raised money, and then they kept bringing on extra contributors. And they also partnered with artists in this space. And then from there, they basically said, okay, we're going to start creating different drops, different like NFT art projects, and allowing ourselves, that's going to be our revenue stream. And we're going to team up together with them. And kind of going back to our point earlier around distribution, this group is known as, Fingerprints DAO is known as some of the top collectors in on-chain generative art. And so if you are an emerging artist, up and coming artist, and they select you to basically do a drop with them, then many people are going to respect you. They're going to want to purchase from you. They're going to want to collect your work. And so I view them as like the modern curators, like the modern intermediaries in many ways. And one of the main differences, like one of the obvious questions is, okay, why did they need to be a DAO? Why can't they just be a normal corporation? And I think the main difference with that is that now people that hold this token, whenever you get membership, you're basically able to, they use it as a governance token and deciding together on, okay, what is the direction? So there's decisions like, okay, we want to, like, how should this drop work, this specific NFT drop? Who are the different artists we should onboard? Should we invest in our own owned media channel, or should we invest in like a fund to fund grant programs? And just allows people to have this more decentralized way of making decisions. But then also one other benefit is that there's a global market, like liquid market for this token. And so at any point, if you're like, okay, this isn't run the way that I want it to be run, or maybe I need liquidity to purchase a house or something of that nature, then from there, by making it a token, you basically have this global liquid market for it, and anybody can purchase it.
So I'm going to push this way further back into the conversation, but it's an important one that takes us to the transitionary stage. We were talking once again about the importance of this pre-broadband era conception. And you could look at the 1990s and the dot-com bubble and everything that happened, and you could see all these problems with that on a couple of different levels. But something that very helpfully happened is all of that speculation, all of that energy in the space actually increased server capacity. It actually built the literal broadband. It actually expanded broadband connections across the US. So it actually was a Web 1.0 failure, quote unquote, that actually enabled the building blocks for Web 2.0. The same thing happens in Great Britain during the 1840s with speculation in the railroads, but that ended up actually building the tracks that fueled the rest of the growth of the century. So how should we think of looking at the past 10 years of crypto? How should we think of these different speculative bubbles and periods? Are they building the infrastructure for the next stage? How should we just conceive of them? Because this is what seems to put off a lot of people who are just looking at it at face value. You see the people who said, see, I told you it was all fake. A crash just happened, but then something comes back. How should we think about this?
Yeah, definitely. And so there's a really good presentation by A16Z's crypto startup school. And they have this model that I really like where it's basically think about these cycles as a virtuous cycle between price, interest, and activity. And so you have prices go up, say it's Bitcoin, ETH, everyone's talking about it at Thanksgiving, they're talking about it in their group chats, they're talking about it online, and say, oh my gosh, somebody just bought a JPEG for $3 million. How crazy is that? Or you hear your friend, oh my gosh, I just 1,000x'd my investment through Dogecoin or just something like that. And so people get excited, like, okay, wow, that sounds really fun, interesting, weird. And so that leads to this next part of the cycle where it's the interest starts to build. And so at that point, people start looking on subreddits, they start hanging out on Twitter, they join Discord servers. And from there, there's being more like passive / active contributors in these different ecosystems because they want to learn how the game is played. And then the next part of the cycle is activity. And so some percentage, if you think about it like a funnel, some percentage and like churn, retention, et cetera, engagement, some percentage are going to churn out and be like, this isn't for me. I'd rather go and do something else. And then, but some percentage of these cohorts are going to remain retained. And some percentage of them, they're probably a mix of entrepreneurs, they're a mix of designers, engineers, investors. And from there, that basically, from where you started 6 months ago, there's this new cohort of people that are actually there that are going to be there for the long term. They're going to be building products. They're going to be investing in the next generation of products. And of course, if you look at it from for like a short-term or near-term perspective, there's going to be ups and downs. It could be at any point in this cycle. It could be, really high prices. It could be all-time lows. But if you look at it in terms of activity and interest, who are the people that are staying? Who are the entrepreneurs that are building products? Who are the investors that are investing in projects? Who are the engineers that are working on the tools? And if you look at it from that lens, I think that kind of shows that specifically in crypto and on these different crypto networks, I think that's like the key metric to look at is the activity as opposed to the short-term prices.
So this is the part where we're going to speculate and think about what's next in the space. We've discussed this a bit, and in the presentation, you have a really useful, I think, articulation of what that could look like and where we basically are. So for example, right now in this moment, we're talking about creators, we're talking about crypto art, crypto media, cryptocurrency, crypto finance, but tomorrow we could have crypto social, crypto commerce, crypto work, crypto firms, and crypto state. So in this last bit, I'd love to just go through each of those categories, starting with, for example, crypto social, get your articulation of what that could look like. And if you're seeing any initial sprouts that indicate that we're seeing something promising there. So let's start with crypto social.
Yeah, crypto social is probably my favorite just because I spent so much time growing up on social networks and my parents had to basically block Facebook when I was in high school because I was just spending so much time on it. And so I think with crypto social specifically, I'm very interested in this idea of non-fungible likes. And so right now, like on social apps, like the engagement metrics, or the kind of engagement model includes things like likes, subscribers, follows, shares, retweets, etc. But I think in a crypto native world, or in a world where you have digital scarcity tied to value, you can basically turn these likes, follows, shares, subscribers and you can convert them into cash. And so we're already actually seeing that with this blockchain game called Axie Infinity, where basically you can earn this in-game asset, this in-game currency. And with this currency, it's SLP. And there's also this governance token as well that you can earn, where you can basically take, and people in the Philippines are using this as a full-time job. They're taking these in-game assets that they're earning and then converting it to their local currency. And by that, they're able to pay for their groceries, pay for their rent and things of that nature. So I think this idea of that specific example is more of a fungible like in the sense that, it's like this in-game currency, but I'm also interested in like non-fungible likes where it's like, hey, what if I wanted to say, what if I had 10 tokens to give out each month for like the best content that I've read that month? And so now instead of just trying to optimize for the most number of likes or the number of followers, maybe it's more about depth of engagement and having people say, okay, I just want 5 people that I really respect to give me their one badge. And then you can come up with all these interesting mechanics where you can create more scarcity within these social networks, but then also allow people to take these in-game currencies and then convert them into real world currencies they can use to fund their lifestyle and to pay things off that they need to.
So next we have crypto commerce.
Crypto commerce. Yeah. So I'd say that's really what we've seen a lot around NFTs in terms of having this global market for like these digital assets. And so right now, if you're using something like Amazon, Shopify, et cetera, there's this offline component, shipping, logistics. It takes time. It can be expensive at times. It might get damaged in transit and things of that nature. And there's like no guarantee of that. Like specifically, even with, let's say, like sneakers, for example, like there's this whole industry around, okay, you need to authenticate the sneakers, make sure it's coming from the right source, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that with crypto, it's going to look a bit different in the sense that, one, you have this authenticity, you have these signatures from like actual addresses, and you can say, okay, verify this came from this specific person. They authorize this art, et cetera, token, and I'm purchasing it from them. And so that's one interesting example is like the authenticity. And then two, I think with royalties, in the sense that now you can track, you have provenance of all the transaction history for the specific item. And so in the past, you basically have Yeezy, for example, they would launch a shoe, they would sell it at retail for like $200, and then resale prices would go up to $1,000, $10,000, $20,000. Whereas now with NFTs, we're seeing a lot of artists, they're making most of their value through the resale market, through royalties. And they say, hey, we're going to price it low or we can mint it for free, but then I'm going to make most of the money off of the royalties. I want this to be proliferated. I want people to have access to it. I want to lower the barrier to entry, and I'm going to monetize through resale value and by growing the IP of this universe over time. So I think that's the big trend with crypto commerce.
Crypto firms. We're just going down the list, everyone. I want to use this as a shout out to the presentation, but it's very helpful. Crypto firms.
Yeah. So crypto firms I would view as these DAOs that we were talking about earlier, where now instead of being incorporated in Delaware and having legal documents and being bound through equity and legal contracts and like these complex agreements, now with DAOs, it's basically just code that lives on a blockchain. It's okay, what is the structure of this organization? We're going to have this number of tokens. They're going to be issued at this rate, and we can change this, but it's going to happen through this community governance type process. And then we don't have this bank account that our CFO or our finance team controls. And instead, we have this treasury that lives in a contract at this address on the blockchain. Anybody can see all the capital inflows, see all the capital outflows. And if at any point you want to exit this community, this organization, this system, and you're able to basically, you have a global market to be able to trade that. And so I think that's like the big thing with crypto firms is this more like internet native way of running organizations and having this sort of like community governance and global market for these tokens and this programmable nature of the organization as well, where you can basically, it turns into these companies and the rules that govern them and the enforcement of them is now embedded within code and smart contracts. And again, there's definitely, I'm not one of those people that thinks that code is going to run everything and there's no place for humans. I think one of the most important roles are community managers, and the best communities have the best community managers and people that are actively in the Discords answering questions. And frankly, most governance proposals, they basically already know what the decision is going to be they already know what the decision is going to be before the governance proposal has been filed. And it's really around like building consensus before you have this governance process, talking to people, having conversations, actively engaging. And so I think that's actually the most important part. But these other fun crypto tools and toys are really just like an accelerant to like that core idea of like community building.
And this is the most fun and most speculative one, crypto states. Of course, this is near and dear to my heart as a biology Srinivasana reader, one of our first episodes of the podcast. But talk about crypto states.
Yeah. When I first heard it, I was definitely like, I'm not sure how that would work. But then I've been biology pilled as well. And it's just like, the way it explained and said, so I could see something where, okay, so you want to say that you have a group of friends, a small community, and you want to crowdfund. So the process could be you crowdfund, say $100 million or $50 million, either from your network or from other people, and you go buy some land somewhere, and then you own this land, and maybe you have an agreement with a country, and you say, hey, we'll pay this much in taxes if you allow us to have like our own self-sovereign like land or commune or city within your country. So you crowdfund to do that, and then you have this cryptocurrency that allows you to kind of basically dictate the rules of the currency. You can say like Bitcoin, there's only 21 million or there's 10 million. And the benefit of cryptocurrency is that, now it's very transparent. You can see, you don't necessarily need this complex like policy making and things that can potentially be opaque and not understandable. And so you have a cryptocurrency for that as a medium of exchange, but also to store value. And so if you're living in this city, you can buy goods with them and people recognize it as like the medium of exchange. And then also in terms of like making decisions, like policy decisions around like public goods funding or public infrastructure or public benefits programs, you can do that through some sort of like decentralized governance process where people are elected through, I think the main thing is that you can program governance. That's kind of one benefit of doing in this like crypto native fashion, where in the past it's okay, this is the model of governance. It was written in the Constitution 300 years ago, and it's not going to change because basically we don't think it should change. And there's alterations that are made in amendments, but I think that just the iteration speed and the cycle time by having this be done in code, in software, will make things say, hey, maybe this cycle, this governance mechanism didn't work. Or maybe within our city, we're going to have 3 different governance mechanisms for 3 different committees or types of decisions. And we're going to A, B, C test them, or just test them in parallel and decide which one works. And so I think the programmable nature of this stuff will really accelerate decision-making, governance, and how it's made. And so, I think at a high level, that's how it could work eventually.
Final question here is, whenever I have conversations on Web3, these broader crypto ideas, NFTs, the number one source of positive feedback and interest is always some people who are broadly in the creator economy. It's really interesting. There's clearly this set of people who now conceive themselves in this framework, but there's a large amount of curiosity, and there aren't really straightforward sources of advising people how to think of the space. For example, there's no CAA, Creative Artists Agency, for creators who are interested in this type of stuff. What would your number one piece of advice be to folks who are doing this? Like a quick side thing, when my co-host at the Realignment Saga went independent, initially he was advised to like mint an NFT. He didn't really know what that meant, and that just kind of like went by the wayside. How should people just think about these different bits as they're approaching it?
So unfortunately there is no like boot camp, or I haven't seen one where it's like, okay, go to this place and in 4 weeks you'll be a crypto expert. Unfortunately, I'm sure somebody will create that at some point. And so now a lot of it really, I think the best way to accelerate any type of learning is to find a mentor and to find someone that can guide you, that has experience. And that can definitely be tough at times because people tend to be busy, and if you don't have a reputation, that's very difficult. And so mentorship doesn't necessarily mean, hey, we're going to do an hour-long phone call every week. Mm-hmm. Mentorship can be more passive, where it's, hey, I'm going to turn on tweet notifications for this group of people. And so if you like specifically, there's people like Cooper Turley, there's Jess from Seed Club, there's the Forefront crew, Carlos. In terms of like creator economy, I think those are like 3 great places to start. Friends with Benefits as well, and getting involved there. And so I think like really finding these people, finding these pockets, these communities that, they tend to have a high concentration of similar types of people, creators, et cetera, that are learning about crypto at the same time. So that's one, finding those mentors. 2, the other big thing was, really around just actively contributing. And it's definitely tough if someone just says mint an NFT. It's like, wait, I don't know what mint means. I don't know what NFT means. And so, I think that being part of these communities, actively contributing, finding friends within them, usually they do have a really strong ethos of apprenticeship, mentorship, helping others, because most people, they've been in the same position or similar position just 3-6 months ago. And so they're willing to help. And so I think the best thing is, to go on Twitter, find those people, Cooper, Jess, Carlos from Forefront. And they're 3 great people specifically for creator economy, and get involved with their communities, join the Discords, ask questions, join the voice calls. And then from there, you'll naturally emerge like different areas that you can experiment more with.
That's a great place to leave it. Patrick, Do you have any work you're doing that you want to reference people to as they move out of this episode?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on Twitter, Patrick X Rivera, and then also maintain a blog on Mirror, p.mirror.xyz, and want to continue writing more about creator economy and communities, crypto, and how they could intersect in the future.
Great. Well, Patrick, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.